Welcome agents, I've compiled a list of changes and additions that I think need to be considered for Title Update 6. Now these ideas have come from community Reddit posts, Twitter, and your responses to my community posts posted on here yesterday, so thanks to everyone for responding. There is roughly 40 changes or additions here, so I'm not going to explain in this video why I think these are needed. Instead, I'm just going to say what they are and briefly give an explanation for them. I might follow this up with multiple videos covering each change individually and answering the question of why, so stay tuned for that. Okay, with that said, let's go through these. Okay, so these are in no particular order, and I will briefly try and explain each one if I can. So firstly, we should be able to roll any offensive, defensive, or utility attribute for any other type. And what I mean by that is we should be able to roll, say, a red attribute with a blue with a yellow, blah de blah de blah. You know, I think at the moment, just due to the fact that you have to roll red with red, blue with blue, yellow with yellow, the RNG in that again is a big issue, and it is part of a wider issue. But I think if they did it so that we could roll whatever we wanted, then that should remove that. Although I do think there maybe needs to be possibly some restrictions to that, just because there is a scenario where it could be, for example, that you just roll red attributes on everything and you'd have like the highest amount of damage known to man. But there could be a scenario where it kind of breaks the game. So that would have to be, of course, it would have to be tested as with all of these changes. Number 2, there should be a way to allow us to improve our stats, which doesn't come from just getting RNG. What I mean by that is, in Division 1 we had the optimization station. I'm not saying we should have something like that, but then we should have something which gives us a clear path to actually improving the stats on our gear, rather than just trying to hope that your piece of gear has a higher armor attribute or better rolled stats, or your weapon has a higher base damage. For number 3, roll 2 stats on gear. So you should be able to roll either 2 attributes or roll 1 attribute and 1 talent. I've got to say this is probably the most common response when it comes to loot and RNG, and I think this has to be implemented with TU6. And I think this will be 100%. For number 4, every brand set, I believe, should be in every gear item slot. So as of right now, you'll have some gear or some brand sets that can't roll on certain pieces of gear. I believe like Petrov, I don't think you can get Petrov knee pads. I could be wrong, I'm just going from memory here. But I don't think that's right. I think you should be able to roll, every piece of gear should be able to roll on every piece of actual gear. So every brand set should roll on every piece of gear, I'm trying to say. That's what I'd want. For number 5, I believe that you should be able to purchase materials with credits. I see a lot of posts with people saying they've got 1 million credits, they've got nothing to spend it on. And I think there should be a way to actually purchase materials with credits. I think that would be a good idea. And from that, moving on to number 6, I think that the material cap should be significantly increased. If you think back to Division 1, I think towards the end we had a Phoenix credit cap of 8,000 or 4,000 or 8,000. At the moment we're going to get, I believe with TU5 it's gone up to 600. No, it's still 400 at the moment, I'm pretty sure. And that's just too low. That really is ridiculously low. I think it needs to at least go up to 1,000. I think it should go all the way up to maybe 2,000 to 4,000 material cap. So, and that should help a lot. Moving on to number 7, I believe, we need more PvP modes. And, stuff like Hardpoint, for example. Hardpoint is a very good mode. It means that stuff like turrets, stuff that, that needs to manually shoot in a certain direction, would be really good on stuff like Hardpoint, where you have to stay in a particular area for an extended period of time. And I think skills like that would be actually be useful in PvP. Moving on, and I'm going to forget saying 1 to 7, guys. I'm just going to carry moving on. I believe they still need to lower the time to kill just ever so slightly. At the moment, the time to kill in PvP feels good. Okay, but I still think it's a little bit too high. I really do, because I've come across people who've had 400k armor going into normalized PvP modes, and they're still tanks. And these are players that also have high damage and fairly good skills. The diversity in respective builds at the moment is kind of just high armor, good damage, and good skills. It's kind of that hybrid, but I still think that high armor, because it's so possible that when people do go towards that, even with the good damage and stuff, it still feels like the time to kill might be too long. So I would change the modifier from 0.55 to 0.6, just bring it down a little bit and test it from there on. So moving on to, we will do the numbers, I think we're on number 8. I'd said this one before, but I think we need to increase the crafting materials. Number 9, I think they need to tighten up the stat roll range. and remove overlapping. So at the moment, a lot of gear, and this should mean that gear score becomes actually important, and this goes on to another point I was going to make, but I think they need a whole gear score overhaul, just in total, ultimately. They even need to tighten up the stat roll range, or they just need to remove the overlapping whatsoever. You shouldn't have a 500 piece of gear that has, the roll is less than a 490. So say you got a P416 at 25k at 500 gear score. Well, if that drops and it's 24k, well, that should be a 490 gear score item. If it drops at 23k, that should be a 480 gear score item, and that's how it should work, and that should remove the overlapping, and that's one of the main reasons that people get frustrated with, especially with weapons, when you have a higher gear score weapon but it doesn't matter. And again, we're going to get onto gear score and stuff like that as we move on here. I believe there should be a way to recalibrate mods, and again we're going to get onto some more stuff about mods, but if they do want to go down that road, I think recalibrating mods would be possibly a good idea. As I said before, gear score, I think they need to completely overhaul the gear score. At the moment, the gear score represents the potential for that gear, but it doesn't actually represent the power of the gear that's just dropped. So you can have a 500 gear score item. The potential of that gear is gear score 500, so the potential is a lot higher, but what's just dropped in front of you does not represent the power of that gear. That's what we had in the Division 1, and I don't know why they've changed it. I really don't understand why they've gone for this completely different way of dealing with it, because gear score, and I've said this multiple times, but gear score is completely irrelevant at this point, really. So I think they need to change that. I think they need to go back to the Division 1, and your gear score should represent your power, not your potential. Moving on, recalibration from any gear piece, even from your stash. So I think if you're in the recalibration station and you've got a piece of gear in your stash, I don't think you should have to go and get that piece of gear from your stash, put it on, go back to the recalibration station, blah, 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 blah. I think you should simply be able to go into the recal station. Okay, I want to, change this or get a different talent here, whatever. And I think you should choose from all of the gear that you have stored, whether it be on your character or in your stash as well. I think for that, it just makes it just easier, and it stops the back and forth and the stuff that I find personally really frustrating. I think there needs a better chance of certain gear dropping from certain enemies or activities. So, for example, SMGs. Let's say, for example, Black Tusk. So if you do Black Tusk activities or you defeat Black Tusk, then you've got a higher percentage of getting a certain piece of gear or SMGs or whatever it might be, and that way you can sort of narrow in what you want. Say, for example, I want some Fenris knee pads. Well, I know, say, for example, True Sons drop Fenris knee pads, or they drop Fenris in general, so I'm just going to go and farm stuff which has True Sons in it, and that gives me more focus, rather than just going wherever and hoping it drops. It gives us more focus, it gives us that better chance to actually zone in on what we're looking for. Moving on, I think there needs an armor mod change. At the moment, if you have mods and they've got percentage-based armor roll, so 4% or armor 4% or whatever, they're by far the best. Okay, that's what everyone's putting on because they just offer so much value. And what I think that needs to happen is they need to buff all the other values to compete with that percentage-based value, because at the moment, like I said, they're kind of best in slot. Moving on, I believe they need to reduce the crafting cost. The crafting cost is extortionate. With that, they need to reduce the recalibration cost. Again, extortionate. Especially when you consider that with this stuff, like especially recalibration, you can only have like 400 of each material. So it's easy to run out of materials and stuff when you're recalibrating. Credits not so much, but certainly materials, which is again why materials need to be increased. There needs to be an ability to extract talents and or attributes and store them. This is something I've seen cropped up quite a few times. I actually like this idea where you can go to recalibration station. You don't want to put that talent on that piece of gear, but what you want to do is you want to take that talent from that piece of gear. That piece of gear gets destroyed, but it's saved into a recalibration station or wherever. It doesn't take up stash space, but it's saved in there so that you can use that again on another piece of gear that you might find that you want to swap it onto. And that way people just stop hoarding gear in their stash because that stuff's being saved into the recalibration station. Just an idea. I think it's actually a really good one. I believe there needs to be more active backpack talents. At the moment, there's really not that many, and I think there needs to be more. I think the skill mods need to act like weapon mods. Now this is, again, I think it's a really cool idea. So with weapon mods in the Division 2, as you all know, once you unlock them, you unlock them. And I think they need to do a similar thing with skill mods. Because at the moment, because skills are quite prevalent at the moment, I mean, you only get 100 as space for your skill mods. And that easily gets filled up because there's so many different mods for each piece or each skill. It's very easy to actually get that completely full up, and you end up having to go through and getting rid of stuff. Whereas if they made them act like weapon mods, where, say for example, you unlock a certain type of skill mod, then that would be much easier, and then you could go in and again, if we move on to something else I've got down here, then you would have skill mods that actually act or are scaled by skill power. Okay, so I think, again, that would be a really good idea where the mods are actually affected by skill power. So if you've only got, 1,000 skill power, you're still going to get some up from that mod, but it won't be nearly as much as someone who's got 3k skill power. Because at the moment, you could have, for example, 1,000 skill power, but you could have no mods that will do anything in respect to that. So you're kind of wasting that skill power, whereas this way around, that wouldn't be wasted. I think there needs to be a weapon overhaul. The P416, the best non-exotic assault rifle in the game for DPS. Okay, it's important to me to mention DPS because there are weapons in the game that I personally really like. I've actually really liked the Carbine 7 now because it's like a laser, but the damage on it is so low compared to the P416. I just use the P416 generally. And then you've got the Eagle Bearer, which is kind of an outlier as well, along with the P416, which is by far the best assault rifle or even weapon in the game for DPS. But I think there needs to be a weapon overhaul where they need to look at all the other weapons that aren't quite competing up there, and they need to bring those up. Bring them up to that ceiling the same way they did that with skills. Moving on, I think they need to increase the player size in the DZ from 12 to maybe 16, and if that still doesn't feel like a lot, maybe move it up to 20, possibly. Again, that will need to be tested, but I think, and I don't play in the DZ often, and again, this is not just me, I'm not just saying this is what people are saying, so I'm taking your guys' ideas here, but from what I can tell, the DZ is still a ghost town. Part of that is because people just aren't going in the DZ because of so many issues with PvP, but the other part of that is because the player count's just too low in those areas, and I think that needs to be upped. A suggestion here, the increase ADS speed. I've noticed this actually when I'm playing PvP, definitely when I'm playing PvP, not so much in PvE, it doesn't really matter too much, but in PvP certainly, I think the ADS speed on most weapons is too slow. I would like to personally see that increased. Moving on, I think you need to be able to roll 2 stats on weapon talents, so at the moment you can only roll 1. I think you should be able to roll 2 talents. I think you should be able to roll 2. Okay, just a suggestion. Moving on, mod slots on every piece of gear, and I think they need to remove the 4 attributes that you can get on certain pieces of gear. So you look at Badger Tough backpacks, Petrov backpacks, they come with 4 attributes. I think that needs to go. I think they need to go down to 3, and I think every piece of gear should have a mod slot on there. I just don't like that idea. And this goes into actually another one here that I don't think I've actually written down, but Fenris chest piece can roll a major and a minor attribute. But no, I don't believe any other piece of gear or chest piece can do that. Why is that? I don't understand. I think every chest piece should have a major and minor attribute, or there should just be one major attribute. They should just get rid of the minor one from Fenris. I don't understand why it's not like that. If anyone actually knows why they did it that way, then please let me know in the comments down below, because I actually have no idea. Moving on, I believe they need to reduce the total armor percentage amount on gear. Now, this may be controversial, but right now, the total armor percentage on gear is by far the best in slot. When you've got a high amount, like 30%, best in slot attribute you can get on a chest piece, right? It's kind of like you have to have it. And not just on chest piece, you can get it on backpacks and stuff like that, but you have to kind of have it, right? And that was like the Division 1. In the Division 1, I believe there was a stat where you could have armor. And it got removed eventually because it was the best in slot. You had to have it. And that appears to be where total armor percentage is coming. That's where it is currently. I just think it needs, I hate saying the word nerf, but it needs to be balanced a little bit more so that other, attributes are, this isn't by far the best in slot. Other attributes become, something that you could possibly look into using as well. So moving on, I think there needs to be some UI changes. The one that comes to mind initially is stat ranges. So when you get like a weapon that drops, and say you get an AK that drops and it drops at 23k, it should say what the minimum and the maximum stat range on that particular AK is. And then if you go back to the point I made earlier, there should be a way to then try and increase that up to the maximum range. And That's just one UI change. There's probably a lot more, but that's one that certainly for me I think would be a really cool idea. Next one, I think this is really important. I think they need to remove the base armor from the calculation of gear score. So if you didn't know at the moment, if you get a piece of gear which has really high base armor, it means that the attributes on that gear are going to be really low because they all come from the same pool. Which is why you'll find that actually a lot of the time when you go back to lower gear score items with armor, say 450, normally have really high armor for that very reason, because there's less chance of having attributes on that piece of gear. So that needs to be removed from the equation. That shouldn't be that shouldn't make up the gear score. Base armor should be base armor. And again, with those stat ranges, you could see what's the minimum, what's the maximum, how do I increase that? And I think that would be cool as well. I think there needs to be a way to sell gear directly from your own inventory. I hate having to go all the way back to a vendor just to sell my stuff. That's really annoying. It would be nice for me to actually just do it on the fly rather than go all the way back home. That would be cool. This one's important to me. They need to fix the lag in the PvP. And I don't know if this is an Xbox issue, but my Xbox One X in PvP, I lag all over the place. I don't have bad internet or anything. It's just the laggiest mess I've ever experienced. Actually, I had a better experience on my old just general Xbox, although it was still laggy. And I think they need to fix that immediately because I simply don't play PvP for the lag alone. I would actually play PvP more often, especially now with the new time to kill, if there wasn't so much lag, hit registration, all that stuff. If that was gone, I'd play it more. But it's just a complete mess. So that needs to be really, really looked into. They need to fix the lower clan vendors having better attribute rolls. How many weeks in a row now have we had it where a lower clan vendor will have a better roll than a level 30 clan vendor? It's just, I think even most recently, I think I saw a post recently where a level 23 or level 24 clan vendor has a better roll than the level 30. And I just don't. And again, this goes back to the whole gear score thing that we were talking about earlier and all that sort of stuff and the overlapping attributes and all that stuff. But that shouldn't happen. That just shouldn't happen. What's the point of getting a level 30 clan vendor if you're not going to be rewarded for it? It needs to be fixed. Moving on, harder difficulty rewards better rolled gear, i.e. if you do heroic mission, you should have a higher chance of max rolls, and that chance should be very, very high, okay? But if you do normal mode, then there's still the chance that you might get a max rolled item, but the actual chance is significantly lower. And that way you could, you're rewarding people for doing the activities that are much harder to do, and there's probably a lot more examples of how they could do that, but that's just one of the examples that I found. And lastly, and again, this one's a cool idea, and I like this, a recipe system for crafting. Okay, so you go into a crafting station and you decide, you know what, let's take a Badger Tough backpack. I want a Badger Tough backpack with armor, weapon damage, critical hit chance, and health on kill. That's what I want. Okay, well you can do that, but you are going to need this piece of gear. You're going to have to contribute different pieces of gear with those talent or those attributes on. Okay, say for example you need those four attributes. Okay, so you get those 4 attributes from different pieces of gear and all of that stuff, and then you have to put in credits and materials. And if you do all of that, then you get that piece of gear. Okay, and you might say, well, that takes away the RNG, that takes away the grind. Well, it doesn't, because you still have to, RNG still has to gift you with the gear with those talents or with those attributes on in the first instance. And if when you think about adding talents to those as well, RNG needs to gift you with those talents as well. So actually, no, it doesn't remove that, but it gives you a clear goal on the gear that you want. Because at the moment, crafting is better, obviously, but because certainly on stuff like Badger Tough, where you got 4 attributes and you possibly, I think it's 2 talents on a backpack, or maybe even 1 talent on a backpack. You've got five things there that you're trying to roll perfectly. Even when you craft, what's the chances? Pretty much 0. Okay, it's pretty much 0. But if you could say take 4 different pieces of gear, each one with each individual attribute on it, plus another piece of gear with a talent that you want it, and fuse that with materials, with credits to create the gear that you want, I just think that gives you something to grind for. And that's what this game is missing, something to grind for. And so I think that would be a good addition to the game. Just a suggestion that I found online, I thought it was cool, and I thought I'd add it here. But there you go, guys. That's the end of the video. I'm not sure if that was 40. It may have been a bit less, but, For the sake of clickbait, then we're gonna go we're gonna go with 40. Anyway, hopefully you all have a good weekend. Obviously the devs are listening, and that's why I decided to make this video. If you guys want to add your own stuff in the comments down below, I will read them. Please do. And if we get a lot of feedback on this video, I may actually send this video straight to the devs and say, look, this is what I think. This is what I've taken from online. This is what my community thinks. What do you think? Who knows? TU6 may be the update that brings this game back. Anyway, thanks for your support, and until the next one, Epic out.